and may now speak to any other organizers or panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. And lastly, if you miss a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, go to our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc., Design Manager INC. And here you can see a complete listing of topics, including our quick start videos, short helpful tutorials, and our more comprehensive webinars that we categorize in our project management and accounting courses, along with all of our other weekly webinars as well. Okay. In today's discussion, we'll be reviewing overall strategies for order tracking, the appropriate windows to record such information, reports to review tracking statuses, etc. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, order tracking represents the recording of information for purchases from your vendors so that you have the clearest picture of where each order and therefore the project as a whole is in the natural order cycle. Now, I won't be going into great detail onto how to actually create purchase and work orders, as those processes are described at length in our Project Management Course 2, Purchase Orders, and Project Management Course 3, Work Orders. One issue that must be addressed as a company is to determine the amount of order tracking information that's necessary to function properly. The answer of which is obviously going to vary from company to company. There exists a natural balance when it comes to order tracking, and that balance is between the time and labor it takes to record the information versus the perceived worth of the information when reviewing the status of current orders. Some companies find only the bare minimum of tracking is required, while others, find that every milestone and marker is recorded and reviewed. There is no definitive correct answer. I just suggest to determine what information is needed to be consistently recorded and ensure that all staff members adhere to that standard. So let's begin with the primary areas in Design Manager to record order tracking information, which will also allow us how to see what information can be recorded. The primary area for recording order tracking information is the purchase order status window. Now, in your Pro Cloud, this is accessed through your purchase and work orders, where we enter either a project or a vendor, quite honestly.
Alias, if we need anything delivered.
And selecting the order in question.
Kristen sent that picture.
And clicking the receiving status button.
By her.
Deliver?
I guess. I don't know. Wow. To start it, girls, this world has become insane. The president of our school is making all of our classes virtually online for the remainder of the semester because of the virus. We just found out. School.
Hold on one second, folks. We're getting some other conversations on the line here. Okay, that's a little bit better there. All right, where were we? Okay, so purchase order status window. So we're going to use our Hilson project. We're going to select purchase order 3, and we're going to click the receiving status button. And that gets us to our purchase order status window. Let's take a look at the overall window as a whole and see what information is available for us here. So along the top left, we're going to see some information that's really just for informative purposes. We can't change that information, such as the purchase order number itself, the order date, the vendor, the project name, etc. We also, in this case, see the revised or change order. I'm going to slide this down a little bit and notice I can see a revision or change order date associated with this purchase order. If I did not process a change order, that obviously would not be displayed there. There's also additional information called the ship by date. component window. So it actually defaults when creating a purchase order if you're not familiar with that process. I'll quickly show that. Let's cancel our purchase order status window. Click our add PO. I'm going to edit or double click on our drawers here, and we can see on the special instruction tab, I have an area for the ship on or before date. That's going to default to the purchase order itself. We can show that quickly as well for those of you who are unfamiliar with that date. Now look, here's our generated purchase order window, and we can see that ship by date coming from the component window itself. I can, in fact, actually use the edit button along the right side of the grid and either enter or change that date manually as well. So back to our purchase order status window. That's where the ship by information does come from. Okay, now let's look at some information that we can actually input for our order tracking. And that's going to begin with the acknowledgement information. So this is going to be used when the vendor is confirming that they've received the order and are going to begin processing. Usually the vendor acknowledges the entire order, which is why it's recorded for the purchase order itself rather than the individual components. So it's the order itself that's going to be acknowledged. I've also seen the acknowledgement date and number be used to record confirmation numbers when you're using online purchases. So you may make an order, get a confirmation email later in the day or the next day even, and input that information as the acknowledgement date when they confirm the order, and the confirmation number as the acknowledgement number itself. So let's go ahead and put in acknowledgement date and number. Okay. Next, our notes area. We can put in as much information as desired to record any of the communications with the vendor, the shipping company, etc. regarding the order. And this is optionally going to be displayed on many of the tracking reports that we'll see later. I like to use the date input button along the right side of the notes, indicated by the little calendar icon. That puts the date right there for us, highlighted in blue. And any information that I want to input, talked to Sarah about finish on armchair as an example. And I like to put my initials at the end of that to indicate who at the firm had that last communication. Going further down our window, we see our, I'm sure you've noticed the close PO manually and the purchase order close date. Now, that's going to represent the natural end of the order, so we'll get back to that as we proceed through our discussion today. Now, we can enter tracking information for any or all of the components on the order. How do we do that? Well, let's grab our side table here, and to input information about the particular merchandise itself, we're going to click the edit button as indicated by the pencil icon to the right of our purchase order components grid. Doing so brings up our edit order status window, where we can see in the caption the purchase order number itself and the item and reference component number, indicating the exact reference number for that particular component within the project. Expected ship. This is the date that may be provided by the vendor or the shipping company about when the merchandise is going to be leaving their facility. So we could go ahead and input a date there. I'll use my date search. Let's say that's going to be tomorrow. Next, CFA date. If a cut or a cutting is required or a sample of the fabric, the date that it is received and approved can be entered here as well. Now, let's take a quick look. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the CFA processing, I'll show you. Let's go to our Hilson project in our specifications here. We'll grab some fabric. I'm going to edit the component itself, go over to my special instructions tab on my component window, and you can see there's a selection for the CFA required. When that's clicked on the component window, again, for those of you who don't know, that will appear nice highlighted in bold on the purchase or work order itself, so the vendor knows that you want a sample provided for you. That selection or that checkbox for the CFA required, along with the CFA date itself, is going to be the main driver of one of the order tracking reports that we'll see at the end of our discussion today. Okay, let's minimize that guy. Back on our edit order status window. Receive date, obviously very important. This is going to be the most recent date that the product was received. So let's imagine that time has progressed a little bit here, and I can input a date just a wee bit into the future. Then we have two corresponding quantities, the quantity received and the backordered quantity. Ideally, the backorder quantity is going to represent the original purchase order quantity of the merchandise less the received quantity. So if we look as an example, we have two of these side tables that were on the original order, looking at the quantity column behind our current window. So if we imagine that only one of them was received, I could input one into the quantity received field, and when I exit that, notice automatically Design Manager calculates the quantity backordered for us again. Just really trying to keep your data entry as accurate and as fast as possible for you. Next, how about the status storage location? This is a brief summation of the current stage of the product and or where it may be located within your facility or warehouse or somewhere outside of the firm itself. And it could be really any information. There's no set format in here, whatever you want to convey about the particular component itself. Partially received, just fine for us. We have some more dates. We're going to look now at our install date and the user date too along the bottom left corner of this window. As you've already seen, Design Manager innately has a multitude of commonly used tracking dates, but we also provide the ability for you to create two of your own, and they are indicated by the install date and user date too. Where are these recorded or configured? If you click File in the top left corner and go down to your Company Information and Settings window, click your Advanced button along the right-hand side, and hop over to the General tab, and you can see there's two areas for User Date 1 and User Date 2 titles. Now, we configured Design Manager Pro to have install date as a default, just to indicate that as an example of what can be entered. And we leave the other one available for you to use if desired. So I can change that from the default phrase of User Date 2 to something like walkthrough or some inspection date. I'm going to go ahead and click OK to save my changes to the company window. And if we go ahead and save some of the order tracking information that we've previously recorded, jump back into that window by clicking the Edit button again, instantaneously, I've now updated my user date 2 sort of blanket date into my walkthrough date. And that's going to be universal throughout the system now. I've also seen individuals change one of the dates to component acknowledged or maybe comp acknowledged as an example, as an abbreviation. So if you do have a situation where your vendors commonly acknowledge components within an order rather than the order itself, I've seen people change one of the user dates to reflect that as well. Install date, let's go ahead and put something in there. How about a little bit farther along in the future? 4/4 sounds just fine. A few other pieces of information, such as the vendor invoice date, the vendor invoice number, and the actual cost, though they're not editable. I can't make those changes here. That all flows from the accounting portion of Design Manager. So as the accounting team is entering in the vendor invoices recorded for this particular purchase order, that information will automatically be updated on here as well, just for my reference. And if we click OK, take a little bit time now to notice that all of that information is updated on the outside purchase order status window itself. So we can see the expected ship date, the receive date, my current received quantity, again, that vendor invoice date and number information is there for my reference, as well as the quantity paid for, which we'll see a little bit later, my back order quantity, and I have my install date and my storage location. The user date to column will also update as soon as I exit this window and come back in. Now, that's fantastic. I'm changing the order tracking information for a single component, but if I have hundreds or scores and scores of components on a single purchase order, doing so for each one can be a little bit laborious and or tedious. So you can also easily update the tracking information for all components on a purchase order using the Change All button immediately beneath the Edit button itself. So if we click on that button, we have a similar window, but notice now that it does say Change All. So I could go ahead and input my walkthrough information for all of the components. So if I go ahead and let's put in, I don't know, 4/15 as a date and click OK. In this case, I'm not going to just be changing component 3001. Rather, I'm going to update all of them on the order just like that. So a very handy way to put information for a multitude of components on a single purchase order. And let's say I have 10, 20 components on this order, and 19 of them were acknowledged, or had given an expected ship or another date. I may use the Change All option and then just remove the information from those that were not ordered. Just whatever is faster and more accurate for me, so you have some flexibility in your data entry there. Another feature on the Change All is the ability to receive all items. So if I select my Receive All, I could go ahead. It's going to automatically input today's date, but that could be changed, of course. Let's say that everything came in on the 18th. If I go ahead and click OK there, not only does Design Manager put in the receive date for me, it also makes the received quantity the same as the ordered quantity itself. So it simultaneously allows me to input the receive date and sets the quantities proportionate for me as well. So finally, on the Change All, we also have the ability to clear blank fields. Perhaps I entered our walkthrough information undesirably or unintentionally. I could go ahead and still receive my information, my components back on 3/18, but now using the clear blank fields, since both my walkthrough and my status storage location are blank, no information being entered, when I use this option, Design Manager clears our walkthrough and the status that I input for our side table, just like that. Now, be careful on that using the clear all, because there's no way to quote unquote undo that. So if you're taking that information out, do so, with some care. We'll go ahead and put that back in. There we go. Okay, fantastic. So that obviously, the purchase order status window, obviously our main interface to enter and record and review all of our order tracking information. If we go ahead and click OK, we're going to save all of those changes along with the order. And right on our purchase order window, we can see our notes. If I hover my mouse over that column, I can see all of the notes. I may have, dozens of notes being recorded. If I simply hover the cursor over the notes column for the intended order, all the notes will appear for me so I can review without having to actually go into the purchase order status window itself. Just a little bit of a convenience there. I can also see my acknowledgement date and number being shown for me as well. So some of that order related information is also is visible right from the PO window itself. Okay. Obviously, very important into the concept of order tracking is our purchase order status window and the PO window itself. And that's going to transition us into the next window for entering order tracking information. That's the vendor invoice distribution window. So let's close out of our purchase order window. We're going to jump over to our accounting. We're going to go to our bills and invoices. For those of you familiar with some of the accounting side of Design Manager, this is where we go to record any of our bills or deposits or operating expenses with our vendors. Then, if you think about it, since it is quite common that the individual recording the invoice from the vendor may also be the one in charge of receiving the merchandise, or at least coordinating the receiving of that merchandise, Design Manager allows us to provides us the ability to record some of the pertinent order tracking information while inputting those vendor bills themselves. Let's see how we do so. I'm going to click our Add button, and our type, of course, would be Invoice on Project Purchase Order. This is where we'd be actually putting in the bill received from the vendor itself. I'll select one of my prior purchase orders from Century. That looks good. And again, for those of you who have done some of the accounting side of Design Manager, I'm going to just put in the pertinent information about the invoice itself. We always need to have an invoice number recorded. We always need an invoice date. Let's say that came back on the 10th. My due date automatically recalculates for me based upon my vendor settings. Transaction descriptions in Design Manager not required, but I always recommend them so we know what we were doing months or even years prior. Final bill for sofa. Okay, now let's take a moment and see some of the information that's actually available for us right from the vendor invoice window. We notice we have the reference number, the component type, description, etc., but we also have some receiving information. So the received column here can show us the received quantity, the expected ship date, receive date, back order quantity will all be concatenated and appear for us right along this window itself. So Design Manager is going and again taking information from our order tracking and displaying it all the way over into our accounting for us. Because we're fully integrated, we have the ability to show that information throughout the software. Now, I may want to change some of that information. I could be talking to the vendor, or I could be noticing that the order is sitting right in front of me and I can see that the sofa has come in. I may want to input that information to sort of, kill two birds with one stone. So if I have my sofa highlighted and I use the edit button on the side of the purchase order component window here, I could make some changes to my cost, as some of you are familiar with. Let's say that was actually, I don't know, 800. This is where the amount or the cost that we saw on our purchase order status window is derived from. It's from this information itself, along with the paid for quantity as well. This is the only spot that information gets entered. But I can also review and enter some of my optional order tracking information. Like I said, I can certainly see the sofa right in front of me. So I may want to say, well, sofa has been received, and it's also been received on today. 3/12. I could put the status in, paid in full and received. That's my initials, just like that. I could even input or review my install date. Let's say it's going to be the same installation as some of the other merchandise that we were reviewing prior. So not only am I changing my cost or adding freight or doing any of those types of things, I can also be changing my paid for and back ordered quantities, my receiving information, etc. If we click OK here, I can even see that my receiving information has already updated for me, indicating that it has been received in the received date itself. I could even make changes to the chair. Perhaps the bill for the chair did not come in. I did not receive that. I could even say that it's back ordered. And there we go. So while I'm doing my accounting work, I'm also maintaining or reviewing the order tracking information as well. Click OK, post or process our vendor invoice, and all of that information is now going to be recorded in Design Manager. Back on our purchase order window, there is our purchase order in question. And if we go to our purchase order status, we can see all of that information that we just recorded, including all of that status information. I can see my back order quantity for my sofa that has not yet been received. And I can even see my vendor invoice date, vendor invoice number, and actual cost as well. So we can see how these two windows are quite interrelated. Okay, excellent. Purchase order status window, vendor invoice window, two of our areas for entering in order tracking information. Let's go to a third, the component window itself. Again, since Pro Cloud is fully integrated, much of the information that we're reviewing and entering in the windows that we just saw are also going to be conveniently located in our specifications. So let's pop back over to our specification window. Let's go to our Carter project. Let's edit our sofa. Since all of our order tracking information is really sort of our vendor communication, that's going to be listed on our component window. And we can hop over to our order status tab. And right here, I have a lot of that information that I've been recording elsewhere conveniently listed for me. I can see the purchase order for which I included the component upon, all of the acknowledgement information, those types of things. And if I scroll out, I can see the expected ship date, back order quantities received, quantities received, dates, etc. As we saw before, here's where I can enter my CFA date. I have the ability to both update and review the status storage location, along with the user dates 1 and 2, or in our case, the install date and walkthrough. Now, if I needed to change the installation date, for example, let's say that I had to extend that out a few days, I could update my status, move install per client. Just by making the changes here, I could go ahead, click the edit button next to the purchase order grid, which very handily brings us right over to the associated purchase order status window. And I can even see that my install date and the status has been updated here as well. So by changing on the component window, it's changing it right in the status window as well. So you really do have easy access and availability to all this information from a variety of different areas throughout the software. It's not just compartmentalized pieces here and here and here. You can access and view it all throughout Design Manager. Okay. ProCloud also has the ability to track the delivery of merchandise to your clients, or quite honestly, the delivery of product to any different location. In doing so, that's all through the project delivery ticket system, where we can create shipping tickets for items, again, to the client or any location they need to go to, for example. If we take a look here, I've created a example delivery ticket from the past. And our delivery ticket system also has quantities for the client, like the quantity the client ordered, the quantity I'll be delivering to the client, and even a shipping quantity as well. Now, that system is really sophisticated. So we've already created our own webinar about delivery tickets that you can view on our YouTube channel as well. Since I don't want to sort of crush all that information into our time frame, please take a look at the delivery ticket webinar when you have time as well, because those may be quantities or tracking information that you feel is important as well. Okay, delivery tickets. Now, let's discuss the act of closing an order. ProCloud can be configured to automatically close an order based upon your business model. Well, where does that get configured? As you can imagine, that also gets configured on your company information window, into our advanced settings, and on that company advanced options under our purchase and work order tab, we have the designation for order closed by. And for those of you who do have inventory purchase orders, this only applies to project purchase orders. Inventory purchase orders are always closed automatically, and I'll discuss how momentarily. But for our project orders, we have 3 different ways that we can tell Design Manager to automatically close orders, and I'll quickly review those. The first is by vendor invoice. In this case, when all the components on a purchase order have a vendor invoice recorded for them, Design Manager will automatically close the order for us. Now, this is very convenient in that the order closes when you've recorded the bill from the merchandise or service, quite honestly, and that kind of represents the transfer of ownership from the vendor to our company and effectively ends the order. This is also the default setting. The next option is receiving. This is a bit more involved, because this setting is contingent upon us recording that receiving information that we were just reviewing. So all the components on the purchase order must have a receiving date entered and have the receiving quantity match the order quantity. Finally, both. Now, this is the most labor intensive, but it also most accurately portrays the end of the order, as both the financial condition is met when the invoice is being recorded for all of the product and all the product has been recorded as being received. So that's the most accurate, but it does require that you are inputting your vendor invoices properly and doing all the receiving recording as well. Now, going back briefly to inventory purchase orders, there is no such designation. Because inventory is so quantity dependent, let's call it, inventory purchase orders always close based upon both the vendor invoice and the receiving quantity. Essentially, they always follow the both option. Okay, purchase orders closing. Now, as we saw way back in the beginning, you always have the ability to manually close an order. There certainly can be times when an order has reached its conclusion to your satisfaction, and there may be some outstanding issues with pieces that were back ordered or not going to be ordered or what have you. You can always use the purchase order status window to select the close purchase or work order, in this case manually. Click OK. And you can see now the order itself is indeed marked as closed. There we go. So you always have control over the order itself. Okay. Now let's discuss some of the important reports to review all of this information that we've been recording. Now, as a general rule, any closed project or completed item will not appear on these reports. So you can kind of manually manipulate the items that are being displayed for unusual cases. Again, you have that control to set an item to not appear in these reports, or if the project has reached its natural conclusion, you can close that to keep all of your reports as tidy and as manageable and meaningful as possible. A final setting on our company information window is tied directly to those order tracking reports that we're going to see back on our advanced, and as you probably guessed, on our purchase order tab again. On the far right side, we have the PO dates not applicable. What this is indicating is out of the relevant component types, merchandise, and then the 4 wildcard component types, freight, crating, etc., which should not be included when we're considering order tracking information. Well, design fee has no true order. I don't order it from a vendor. It's not going to be installed on a particular date. So I don't want to include any design fee component types on any of my order information. And the same with more service-based issues such as freight and crating. Installation labor, sure, that may be something I want to track. And obviously merchandise. So to prevent certain types from appearing on your order tracking reports, simply check them in the purchase order dates not applicable, and you'll sort of filter off those component types that don't make sense to be tracked in order tracking information. Okay, now reports. So let's jump on our project reports. All of your order tracking reports are underneath your project management reports. And you can see its own folder for order tracking underneath. And then a listing of all of these various order tracking reports that are available to us. For those of you who don't know, you can always organize your reports or select your favorite reports. Perhaps the open purchase order report is especially important to me. So I may want to have immediate access to it. I can select it on the report tree and then click the add to favorites button, which will then put it on my favorite side, which is on a per user basis, so everyone has their own favorites, and I can easily access the report. So I don't have to remember precisely where it is. I can easily access it. Okay, well, speaking about the open purchase order report, this is one of, if not the most important reports for tracking your orders, because at a minimum, even if your company doesn't track any of the other dates, expected ship, acknowledgement information, any of that, you want to be able to determine if an order is open or closed. And this is the report that gives you the ability to do so. So let's go ahead and hit our print button to get to our open purchase order report window. First off, ranges. In any of your reports, you have ranges that are available to narrow the focus of the report itself. And you only want to use them when you're trying to do so. So if I want to see all of the information for all of my projects and all of my vendors, etc., I want to leave my ranges blank. I'm only using a range to narrow it down for a particular project, for a particular order date range, etc. Okay, now, the open purchase order report has a few different report formats. We have summary reports, both by vendor and by project, along with corresponding detail versions as well. Now, the summary is going to list one line per purchase order with all of the dates and information pertinent to the order itself: total cost, deposit sent, and even the amount of invoices received and recorded from the vendor will all be displayed. If I use the project summary, I'm going to group all of my orders by project and list them in vendor order. And if I use the vendor summary, I'll group all my orders by vendor and then in project order, just grouping it however you see fit. So let's use the project summary as an example. By default, our show subtitles is selected. That's going to have a total, in this case, per project, about all of the cost information, etc. Since I want to have the most information shown, I'm going to leave all of my ranges blank and simply click the Run Report. And there we go. So here we can see our open purchase order report. Again, as I just said, I'm grouping it by project, and then I'm listing all the purchase orders in vendor order. And I can see the information on the order as a whole: the vendor, the purchase order number, the order date, the purchase order level dates, such as the ship by and the acknowledgement, and then the total cost of the order. Any deposits that I've sent will be conveniently listed for me, the purchase order less any deposit sent, and I can even see vendor invoice amounts as well, and my my perceived balance due as the final column. So not only am I tracking whether or not the order has been open or closed, but I also have all that financial information listed for me as well. So if that's the summary version, the detail, then we'll do by project as well, is now going to show us not only just the purchase order information, but each component within that order also. From here, I have some other options. I can show my contact information. When this is selected, Design Manager will conveniently show the vendor contact information, such as phone number, point of contact individual, and those types of information. And the show full description is only applicable for the detailed versions, and that will show the entire component description rather than a single line. Obviously, that will make the report a bit longer. And finally, our show status and notes will show all of the individual component status, storage location information, along with the purchase order notes themselves. And here we go. So now we're seeing again group by project, but for each individual purchase order, I do see my purchase order information, such as the order date and acknowledgement information, but now I see my notes that I've input. And I can also see any of the status information that I've entered on the items is going to be listed on the components themselves, right there. And we can see all the component tracking information, such as CFA date, if necessary, the expected ship and back order quantities, receiving information, and all the cost, deposits, purchase orders, and balance on a per component basis as well. So all of that information is going to be listed for us as well. Plus we see additional information like the side marks and those types of things. The component quantity is all listed and available for us. Okay. Again, one of the most utilized and important order tracking reports, at least at a top level, the open purchase order report. Now, it has a corresponding purchase order listing report, which is the exact same formats, except that's going to show all the orders regardless if they're closed or open. So if you want to see all the orders, purchase order listing, focusing only on the ones that are currently active, open purchase order. Next, unordered components, another one of my favorites. An Excel report to see what components need to be ordered. So this is almost before our purchase order reports start becoming relevant, but I want to keep on track of what do I need to order. Focusing here on the show components. The options here show all unordered components. Fantastic. I want to see everything that I have not yet made a purchase order for. Well, that could be certainly valuable, but maybe my project is in its infancy and I haven't even had the chance yet to make an official proposal to the client, and they certainly haven't given me a deposit or somehow acknowledged that they want to proceed. Well, I can then narrow the scope. I may want to say, show me all components that have been proposed. Or even more relevant, show me everything that's been proposed and I have a deposit received. So in that case, the client's not only gotten the proposal, but they've given us the funds, meaning that I better start getting my ordering done quickly. The exclude invoiced items is set by default. That's going to not display any items that are already invoiced to the client. So I may have an item that I transferred from another project or is from inventory or something along those lines that will never that'll never go through the purchase order cycle. So I don't want to show those on the report. Makes sense. And again, you're going to see consistency through all of the order tracking reports where we have the ability to show the contact information, the full description of the component, and the status as well. So let's run this for all projects that we do have a proposal date or a proposal has been recorded. And here we go. So now we can see each project, the vendor of the component, the reference number, the description, quantity and unit of measure, cost, and recall that I use the proposal caveat with my components. So every component on here has already been proposed or will be proposed. So I'm indicating to myself that these are things that are already approved and I need to start ordering them. Unordered components, very, very handy report early on in the project design cycle, so I can keep on top of the components that I need to order, because you never want to get into that situation where you had a deposit and we're getting close to installation date and someone says, oh, I didn't order the throw pillows or whatever it may be. Okay, now that the purchase order has been issued, so we've used our unordered components window, we've used our unordered components report, made our purchase orders. Now I want to move on and see, I want to monitor which orders I've received an acknowledgement for, or I have not received an acknowledgement from the vendor. And at this point, our acknowledgement report and some of the others we'll see momentarily are assuming and are only going to show components that are on a purchase order. You can use the order date range here to narrow down the focus of the report, so we're only looking at components ordered within a particular period, last month, last week, what have you. And our show components option here are without acknowledgement information or with acknowledgement information. Remember, it's the entry of the acknowledgement date, not the number, that Design Manager uses to consider whether or not it's been acknowledged. So if you're just putting a number in, it's not going to use that. The date is the important piece of information there. And again, our other selections for contact information, show the full description, etc. So I think both of these show component selections have merit. So I may want to run the report showing all the orders without an acknowledgement date. And here we go. So these are all the POs that I've created out there that have not yet been acknowledged. So did the purchase order actually get emailed or transmitted to the vendor? Did I mail it? What's holding up the order? If some of these orders are a few weeks old now and I haven't heard anything back from the vendor, I have no idea if the order is being processed or not. So I want to stay on top of those types of things. But if we flip that around, I want to see everything that has been acknowledged. Well, in this case, all right, the vendor has got the order, the acknowledgement, so now I can start sort of tracking some of the other milestones. Have they provided expected ship dates for me? Are there any issues they see in lead times or those types of things? So they've got the order. Now I can really start focusing on other information that I should be receiving from them. And that transition from the acknowledgement report sort of goes right down the line. Well, they've acknowledged it, and like I said, perhaps they're going to give us some shipping information now or estimated shipping dates. So that leads us to the expected ship report. So if the order's been acknowledged, or even if it hasn't been acknowledged, it's important to monitor when the vendor is anticipating that the product's going to be shipped. Very similar. So all of our reports now have a real similar and consistent feel, where we have our various date ranges that are applicable to the report itself. So now I can input acknowledgement date ranges if I wanted to, and I'm always going to have my show component selections. And for the expected ship, we have three. We have, well, all components is going to show everything, of course, but then we have three relevant ones concerning the expected ship date itself. Show me everything without an expected ship date, with an expected ship date, or with an expected ship date and not received. And I also have three different sort by selections. I'm always going to group first by project, but then I could group within a project by vendor. And that's very easy to review what orders need to be monitored by vendor. So I can go right down the list, contact vendor A with all the orders that I need some information upon, go to vendor B, etc. I can also group the report by project and then shipping location. So now I want to review the report and say, okay, this is where I anticipate all of product going to one shipping location or going to another. And finally, I can group by project and the project location itself. So all right, what is all the expected ship information for the family room or for the master bedroom, etc. All of which are very handy and convenient ways to review the information. So I might want to look at, how about we see all of the components without an expected ship date. And we'll do that one by project and vendor. So we can see my project listed at the top, and then I have all my vendors and all the orders with them. I can see easily just go right down what vendors do I need to contact to update my shipping information. We could also, let's switch it to project and ship to and look at everything with an expected ship date. So now I have the project and I'm looking at each of the various shipping locations. So where are things going to be shipped to? So I can then see, all right, I've got my shipping information, so I know to contact whoever's receiving the good at each of the shipping locations that this is when it's going to occur. And finally, we can do the expected ship date and not received. Let's switch that over to our location version and run that as well. So now I'm looking at all of the, I want to focus only on product that I do have an expected ship date for, but I haven't received. A way to be updating myself on when I'm expecting product to come in, whether it has or not, and then who to contact about it. And again, you're seeing that I've now sorted the report by project, and I'm looking at each of the locations themselves. So all those formats I think are very, very helpful. Speaking of receiving, another extremely important order tracking report is our receiving report. This is where we're monitoring what has or has not been received. So if we take a peek here, we can see our report formats. We have by project, by project manager or designer about the project. In that case, I'm going to be showing all the projects first grouped by the designer of those projects. So I can give each of the reports to the various designers of the project, or I can run the report group by vendor as well. I've got a variety of my dates, and my show components here is quite simple. Show me everything not received, or show me everything that has been received. So let's take a look at everything not received. And there we go. So now I'm grouping it by project. I'm seeing all the vendors and the orders and the components for each of the project, when they were ordered, how much has been ordered. And notice, I said, show me everything not received, yet I do see a received date for some of the fabric. Well, it's not received in full. I ordered 24, but I've only received, I've ordered 48, but only received 24. So I'm not received in full. So that should be showing on our report. We can run it again. Let's look by vendor perhaps. Show me everything received. And now we're seeing by vendor. I can easily contact the vendor there and track all the information for the products that I have received. So I can check off, hey, did I get everything from Bungalow? Did I get everything from Century as well? And once I know that it's been received, I can start scheduling internal delivery or having it being reviewed by the designer or principal, those types of things. And finally, on the receiving, we have the options for all components as well, which then provides us the ability to, as a whole, review the project to see what have we ordered, whether or not it's been received, and whether or not it's been back ordered. So very handy on that one. That's one of the few reports that I do show everything. I may run it for all components, so I can really pinpoint on where particular merchandise is in the fact that it's been received or not received. And the concept of receiving, of course, goes hand in hand with being back ordered. So this is going to be very similar to the receiving report, but it only monitors components either with a back order quantity or a back order quantity and not received in full. This can also be used to see what has a back ordered or has not been paid for. So I may be looking for product that has been back ordered, and if I don't record my back order quantities, if I know when I don't pay a bill that that the paid for quantity is still not equal to the order quantity, that could be a trigger for me. So this is a bit of a catch-all there as well. I often use the back order quantity or not all received. So here we catch, and I like the way this report has the quantities broken out for us, and then we can see the ordered quantity, the received, and paid for quantities all being listed for us here. And in that case, I'm going to be showing everything either with a back order quantity or where the ordered quantity does not equal the received quantity. So I'm sort of catching all of the pieces that have not yet been received in full. Another fantastic report to monitor all this information, along with the fact that it has the expected ship date here, so I can say, well, we've already passed the expected ship date. When should I be receiving this, to keep on track with the vendor themselves? Right beneath that, we have the CFA reporting. We saw how you can designate a component as needing a sample being sent on the component window. And this report can be used to either show everything that's designated as CFA required that we haven't yet received a sample, or we have. And again, both have a validity. So if we look here, now I want to see everything that I need a sample for where I haven't got one. So I can call the vendor up and say, hey, I still need a sample. Please send it as soon as possible. Or I could run the report with a CFA date. So now it's everything that I've got the CFAs recorded for. So I can then proceed with actually confirming the order, getting shipping information, and those types of things. So both of those totally have value as well. And finally, we have our user-defined report. These are going to be, for in our case, our installation date and our walkthrough. So if I am using those two additional dates, this is the report that we can use to monitor them. So I can select which date I'm focusing upon and whether or not the date has been entered or has not been entered. So we could, if I want to see everything where I have an install date input, we can do so. And there we go. And we can see everything with all the components with the installation date entered. Or we could, of course, run it to see everything without the install date entered. So I can start getting that information, talk to the principal or the lead designer, talk to the client, etc., to get that installation information decided upon and then entered. Okay, so as you can see, a myriad of different reports that are all utilizing the information that we entered on those simple windows of the purchase order status component and vendor invoice windows as well. And with that, that brings us to the end of our somewhat lengthy discussion on order tracking information today. And we saw that ProCloud really has an intricate system of recording all this tracking information for your orders with as much or little information as your company sees fit. I try to go over all of the windows that have the relevant information for entry, such as the purchase order status, the vendor invoice distribution, the component window. And we discussed all of the reports that you can use to review your order tracking information. And with that, I thank you all for joining the discussion today, and I hope you attend another of our free webinars in the near future. Take care and have a great day.